Happy Halloween! Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope that everyone had a lovely Mabon. Happy fall, I'm so excited. I love this time of year, and specifically I love Lughnasadh, Mabon, and Samhain, so I am ready. But today we are going to talk more about anxiety, OCD, and witchcraft. And specifically, we're going to talk about how to know the difference between an intrusive thought, an anxious thought, and an intuitive message, a psychic message, intuition. So we're going to talk about how to tell the difference between these two things. And I would first like to say thank you so much to everyone that watched my video of me sharing my OCD story. It's been so amazing receiving your love and support and just kind words of understanding and people relating to what I shared. I feel much less alone, and I hope that you guys do too. And it honestly made me feel much less scared to tell people in the future that I have OCD because you guys had such an amazing response. So thank you so much for all the love. And I plan on making a whole series of videos about different aspects of having anxiety and OCD while doing witchcraft. So this is just the first one that I'm going to make. So there are more coming. I'm going to share more tips for people who have OCD and anxiety but also practice witchcraft. But today we're going to be talking about this specific topic. So let's talk about how do we discern psychic messages and intuition from intrusive thoughts and anxiety. So the first way you can identify between these two things is you can say to yourself, is this fear-based? Is the emotion that this thought elicits fear or panic? If the answer is yes, then it is most likely not an intuitive thought. It is not a psychic message. It is an intrusive thought. It is an anxiety thought. So if you are going about your day and suddenly something boop pops into your head and it makes you scared, it's a scary thought, it makes you panic, makes you worried, it's probably not a psychic message. It's probably an intrusive thought. The second way you can identify between these two things goes along with the first way, and that is that a psychic message will never be scary. A psychic message might be, get out of this place, you're not safe, or something's about to happen, you need to move, but it won't make you in your body feel fear. You won't have a bodily response of fear. You'll more so have that calm feeling of knowing. So if it's a psychic message, if it is an intuitive thought, then you will not feel panicky about it. You will not feel afraid. You will feel calm, you will feel centered, you will feel that it is the truth, and you know it to be true. So if it's an intrusive thought, you'll feel panic, you'll feel fear. The next way to discern between these two things is to say to yourself, have I had this thought before? If you've had this thought before, it might be an intrusive thought or an anxiety thought coming back up to the surface. So for me, an example for myself is that I get very anxious about something happening to my pets, something happening to my cats. So I will have occasionally this visual image in my head of one of my cats running out the door and never coming home. Or one of my cats getting trapped somewhere and not having any food, not having anywhere to go to the bathroom, and not having any water. Or one of my cats breaking a screen in a window and getting out the window and falling 2 stories and hurting themselves. All of these thoughts are easily identified as intrusive thoughts or anxiety thoughts because they are based in panic and fear and worry. So when I have those thoughts, I'll think to myself, you've had this thought before. You've had this visual image before. It's something that your own brain creates because you're anxious and because you're worried and because you have OCD and anxiety. So if you know your own personal intrusive thoughts that you tend to get repetitively, you can identify them and say to yourself, I've had this thought before. I might be worried that this time this thought is an intuitive message, a psychic message, but I know that I've had this thought before and it's making me feel scared So it is not an intuitive message. It is just my own intrusive thoughts. The next way to discern between these two things is how you felt it and how you received it. So knowing your own psychic abilities can help tremendously with this. You need to know, how do you receive these intuitive messages? Are you clairvoyant? Are you clairaudient? Are you clairsentient? Are you claircognizant? Which clair are you? Are you a couple different clairs? How do you typically receive these psychic messages? And I have a whole video about discovering your psychic abilities if you want to watch that to get more well-versed in how you receive psychic messages. But if you know how you receive messages, you'll have an easier time discerning between intrusive thoughts and intuition. For example, I am not typically particularly clairvoyant. So oftentimes, if I have a nightmare scenario play out in my head where I'm seeing something horrible happening, I will say to myself, okay, it's probably not an intuitive thought, it's probably not a psychic message, because you're not particularly clairvoyant. I typically am clairsentient, so I feel things. I'm claircognizant, which is where you just know something to be true, you just know it in the moment. And I can be very clairaudient, where I hear things. Occasionally, I will see things in a clairvoyant way, but it is not my first, most strong ability. So often when I have these nightmare scenarios, these nightmare visualizations going on in my head, I stop myself in my tracks and I say, you are not clairvoyant. This is not true. This is something that your own brain is freaking out about. So if you know, I am clairvoyant, I am clairaudient, or whatever it is, you can use that knowledge to help you to discern between intrusive thoughts and anxiety and psychic messages. So you need to know, how did you receive it? Did you see it? Did you hear it? Did you just know it? Did you sense it? How did you come about this knowledge? How did you start to receive this message or this thought? Along the same lines as that, how did you feel it in your body? Did you have a bodily response when the thought occurred? Did you get hot? Did you get chills? Did you feel your heart start to race? Did your breathing accelerate or get more shallow? All these things will tell you, I'm just having anxiety. Or, no, I feel pretty calm. I think this is an intuitive message. So if you're having that fear response, which if you have anxiety or OCD, you should know what your fear response looks like. You could be sweating a lot, sweaty palms, sweaty armpits, just sweating. You could feel really hot all of a sudden. You might suddenly feel really clammy but hot at the same time. You might, again, have your heart racing or your breathing speed up. You might notice that your thoughts are starting to race. All of these things are signs of anxiety and OCD. So if you're having these symptoms along with the thought, you can probably safely say, this is an intrusive thought, it's anxiety, it's not a psychic message. The next thing I would like to share is that intuition is not emotional. Psychic messages are not emotional. Remember that. It's important. So again, relating to what we've talked about previously, if you're feeling fear along with the thought, it's not a psychic message. You will never be sent something by your deities, by your spirit guides, by a spirit in general, at least a spirit of light and love. You will never be sent something negative. You will never be sent something scary. If you are feeling scared or anxious or worried or panicky, then it is not a psychic message. And if it is a psychic message, it's not from an entity that you want anything to do with. So anything that makes you feel panic, fear, worry, it's not anything that you need to truly think this is a psychic message. It's intrusive thought, it's anxiety. The next tip I have for discerning between these two things is doing shadow work and being self-aware. So you need to, again, like we talked about before, learn about your own triggers, learn about not only your own psychic abilities and your own intrusive thoughts that you get consistently from time to time popping up, But you also need to know about your shadow self. You need to know, what are my deep fears? What are my, negative attributes? What are my more chaotic sides of myself? What are the aspects of myself that live in the shadow? And this will help you to discern between, this is my shadow self throwing something at me, and this is a message from spirit, or this is a message from a psychic being. So if you know yourself well and you have that self-awareness and you do consistent shadow work, then you'll have an easier time discerning between these two things. And along with that, having the ability to stop and observe your own mind is so, so helpful. So if you find yourself worrying, oh, is this an intrusive thought or is this a psychic message? Stop and observe your brain. Stop and observe, how am I thinking about this? Again, are my thoughts racing? Am I kind of ruminating on something? This ability to stop and pause and observe your thoughts as if you were not your brain, because you're not, then that will help you so much to say to yourself, okay, I'm just feeling panicky, I'm having an intrusive thought. The next way to discern between these two things is that intuition will come out of nowhere, typically. It will be sudden, and you'll feel certain about it. And something to note is that as you practice with your psychic abilities and your intuition, you'll get better and better at this, and your abilities will get stronger, so you'll have an easier time with this. But know that intuition and psychic messages will not slowly build and build and build and then explode like anxiety will. Psychic messages are sudden and complete in their suddenness. So you'll suddenly hear something, you'll suddenly know something, you'll suddenly see something, versus an anxiety type thought or an intrusive thought that kind of lingers, maybe it morphs as you think about it and as you worry about it. So intuition will not change. Intuition is absolute. Intuition is truth. So when you have an intuitive thought, when you have a psychic message that you're receiving, it will be what it is. It will not morph. It will not change. It will not evolve. When you have an intrusive thought or an anxiety thought, you will maybe ruminate on it, and as you ruminate on it, it will get worse. It will get scarier. You may have a harder time letting go of it because it's scaring you and worrying you, so you may be ruminating on it because you're having a hard time letting go of it and letting go of the emotion that it elicits in your body. Again, versus a psychic message, which will remain the same. It will not evolve. It will not change as you think about it. Sometimes intuition also comes through as a gut feeling. That can be sometimes a good way to identify, but something that people who don't have anxiety don't always get is that if you're like me, a lot of my anxiety lives in my gut. So you have to practice when you do have moments where you have a gut feeling. Pay attention to what happens after the gut feeling and say to yourself, okay, did what I was worried about in my gut happen? Or did what I was worried about in my gut turn out to be anxiety? And even journal what happened and how it felt. And then as you catalog these experiences, you can go back and say, oh, okay, when it was an intuitive gut feeling, it felt like this. Maybe it was a little higher up. Maybe it was a little lower. Maybe it felt less scary. Maybe it felt more like a nudge in the stomach, like a urging, a moving forward, a little bit of a nudge. So paying attention to those moments where you're thinking, oh, is this anxiety or is this intuition? And then not worrying about having the answer immediately, but instead writing down everything you experience and then waiting and seeing if it happens. So for example, I have OCD. So one of my OCD symptoms is checking. So I will need to check doors, check the stove, check sinks, check the fridge is closed, check that the oven isn't on, all those things. So sometimes I will open the door to get a delivery, and I will, in my brain, have a thought that's like, a cat escaped. While you had the door open, a cat ran out and you didn't see and it escaped. So, if we want to practice this method I'm talking about, we would stop, we would notice how it feels. Does it feel like it's up here? Does it feel like it's in here? Does it feel like it's in here? Do I feel hot? Do I feel cold? Do I feel panicky? Did this thought elicit a fear response? Am I ruminating on it? Am I having a hard time letting it go? So already we're getting signs that this is probably an intrusive thought, an anxiety thought. And then I can also know on top of it that this is a thought I have a lot. So it's probably my own brain being nervous. So then, from there, we can choose to, if we want, either sit with it and not check the door and trust that it's anxiety, or we can, if you're feeling like you need to, go out of your way to confirm that it is wrong. So I could go to the door, check, see, okay, there's no cat that escaped. I can go through my house and find all 3 cats and say, okay, all 3 cats were here. And then I can know, okay, we learned something. That was anxiety. That was an intrusive thought. That was a compulsion. So in the future, when I have a thought like that and it feels similar, then I will know this is not intuition. This is not a psychic message. And you can do the same thing for yourself. Something you can also do if divination is within your practice is to do a divination session to get some clarity. So you can directly ask, is this a psychic message? Or you can directly ask, am I just anxious? You can ask a deity, you can ask your tarot deck, you can ask an oracle deck. You can do all kinds of divination to get these messages. You can use a pendulum. So if you do divination in your practice, that is something that you can do to try to gain some clarity. If you're like me, divination can actually be the opposite of helpful. Because I have OCD and anxiety, I often find that I block divination because I'm so, like, my thoughts are racing so much and I'm so all over the place energetically when I am feeling anxious that I can't get a clear answer from a divination method. And then I end up just getting more stressed and more anxious and more confused. So if you're like me in that way, then leave this tip behind. But if divination helps you, then do divination to get some clarity. But do know that if divination does not help you, don't feel weird about it. I know in our society today, in the spiritual world today, it's very trendy to be doing tarot all the time, be doing oracle cards all the time, use a pendulum, do divination, but you don't need to do divination. I do divination like never. I do divination every once in a while, but really my practice consists of spells, rituals, offering, prayer. That's my practice. So I don't do a lot of divination. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to do divination. So if divination gives you more anxiety, if it's not helping you, don't do it. Just throw it away. Like, it's not for you. If it doesn't benefit you, it's not for you. And the last thing that I want to share with you all to help you discern between these two things is that you need to have a relationship with your own mental illness. You need to have a relationship with your own anxiety, your own OCD. And you can do this through things like therapy, shadow work, self-awareness, reading books about anxiety, about OCD, about intrusive thoughts. So educate yourself on whatever mental illness that you have. You know, knowledge is power. So if you know you're self-aware about yourself, if you know your own patterns, you know your own anxieties that you have, your own triggers, having all this knowledge, not knowing about what anxiety is and where it comes from, knowing about where your specific anxiety comes from, all these things will help you to identify an intrusive thought from a psychic message. So again, to kind of recap, an intrusive thought will cause panic, cause fear. You might have a bodily response of your heart racing, your breath getting shallow. You might feel hot and sweaty or cold and clammy at the same time. You may feel nauseous from the thought. And maybe the thought makes you feel embarrassed or shame. These are all signs that it's an intrusive thought and not a psychic message. And again, maybe you're ruminating on the thought. That would lead you to believe that it's an intrusive thought, an anxiety thought. It evolves as you think about it. Maybe it gets worse and worse and worse as you're thinking about it. That's an intrusive thought. And it might be something you've thought about before. It might be an intrusive thought you've had before. So it might be something that comes up every couple days or every time you leave the house or something like that. So that can help you to identify, I've had this thought before and it wasn't a psychic message then, so it's probably an intrusive thought. Those are all my tips for discerning between an intrusive thought and a psychic message. I hope that this was helpful to all my fellow OCD anxiety witches. I know that spirituality can be really hard in certain aspects when you have anxiety and when you have OCD. I plan on talking more about this topic. I have a lot more tips on how to do witchcraft if you have OCD specifically. I know it can be really hard to do certain spells or certain rituals or certain practices when you have compulsions going on in your head or the urge to do physical compulsions. I know things like counting and things like repetition can be really hard for people with OCD because I'm one of them. So we're going to be talking about those things in future videos. I'll be sharing more tips with you guys on how to deal with those things. So those are coming up. But I hope that this first video on anxiety, OCD, and witchcraft was helpful. If you enjoyed it and you found it helpful, give it a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Also, hit that join button and become a member of my channel to get access to exclusive perks, like early access to my videos and the ability to vote in polls that decide what video I make next. Thank you all so much for watching. I will see you soon. Blessed be.